This is the Weather Lounge here at WeatherWorks.
Well, hello there, everyone, and you know what? It's time to drop another fresh podcast here in the Weather Lounge. I'm your host, meteorologist Brad Miller, and once again, our podcast comes to you from our WeatherWorks home office located here in Hackettstown, New Jersey. And joining me, as always, is my ferocious co-host, meteorologist Mike Mahalik. Roar! Hello there, Mike.
Oh my gosh.
What?
What is with you, man?
I don't know.
You are getting out of hand with these
I'm
introductions.
trying to drop hints here. All right. Let's go with this. All right.
Okay.
Mike, do you like animals? And have you ever been to the zoo? And by the way, there's only one right answer here.
Well, you know what? I do like animals, and I have been to the zoo. However, my wife hates animals. No pets, nothing, and that's the way she grew up. So, so we don't have any animals in the house except for betta
Except
fish.
for you.
Well, yeah, I guess you can call me one, or maybe like my son. He's crazy like an animal.
My kids are crazy too. But
anyway,
all right. Well, you know what? That brings us then to our guest for today, and she comes to us from the Lehigh Valley Zoo. And Cherlyn Vatalaro, welcome to the Weather Lounge. How are you doing this morning?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great.
So, Cherlyn, how do you want to be called? I mean, I know we have I see Cher sometimes. Is that okay to go with that?
Yeah. Yep. Cher is great. That's kind of the easier one to go with.
Perfect. And we're not talking about the singer.
No, and I can't sing, so don't ask me to try that.
So anyway, Cherlyn, I'm sorry, Cher. So at the Lehigh Valley Zoo, you're the director of conservation education. So what is that all about?
So I kind of run our education department at the zoo. So this department, we do like a pretty wide variety of things. If you come to the zoo for a field trip, or the zoo comes out to your school or to your organization, that's our department. We develop all the programming, write all the curriculum for the school programs. We do all the booking for the school programs. And we also do all the handling and training of the animals that we use for these programs. So they're different than the animals that you would see when you walk around the zoo. And that's because they're handled differently and they're used differently. So they're the ones that you would meet a little bit more up close and personal when you would do a special program.
Gotcha. So many of our listeners are probably wondering to themselves, like, well, why are we talking to somebody at a zoo? Because we're typically a weather podcast. But that's where we kind of wanted to bring you in, because we wanted to talk a little bit about how the weather affects zoo animals, or, even some household pets and stuff like that. We thought it might be an interesting subject. I mean, everybody's got a story about how, oh, well, their dog starts acting weird if a storm comes in, or their cat hides under a couch if something's about to go down. And
like earthquakes too.
Right. So we thought it would be great if we can get somebody who's an expert like you, Cher, to talk a little bit about how the weather impacts animals.
Yeah, and this actually is great because we do get a lot of questions like that when people come to the zoo. So it might not seem like a relevant thing, but it definitely is, and it's definitely something that a lot of people like to learn more about.
So, Brad, why don't you kick it off with one of our first questions for Cher here?
All right. Well, we'll go right on down the list here. We had some great topics here to discuss with Cher, and so I guess the first one we can, as we're changing now into spring, or the winter is holding on as long as it wants to this year. But how do the changes in the seasons affect the animals, and like how do they cope with winter and snow versus like maybe even when we eventually get into some hot, humid weather in the summer?
So that's a great question. And it kind of depends on the animal. So a lot of people will come to the zoo, and we have penguins at the zoo. And if it gets too cold, they actually go indoors. So that's counterproductive or counterintuitive to what a lot of people think, because you think penguin, you think cold weather. But majority of penguins, there's 18 species. Majority of them actually live in warm climates. There's only like 4 or 5 that live in the cold. So it's kind of been associated through media through all of our lives, that cold weather, but majority of them actually live in warm weather. So when it's too cold, they're actually not out in their habitat. They have a back, like an indoor weather, like climate controlled building with an additional pool. So they'll be in, they'll be in there. I think it has to be above freezing for them to come out. Also, because they don't know how to deal with a frozen pool. So if when their pool freezes, they wouldn't know how to deal with ice. So the keepers are really good at breaking all that ice up and making sure that that stays thawed. So if the weather is above freezing, we start to give them access so they have the choice to go out or stay in. And then eventually it gets warm enough, they'll be out all the time. And so they love the hot weather. They're from South Africa. So like that really, really hot weather is perfect for them. So they actually enjoy that, probably more than we do. And same with our giraffe, from Africa. So he stays indoors while it's cold. If April would cooperate, he would start to get out a little bit more right now. But then we have like the opposite where we have, animals that love the cold. We have a lynx who's built for cold weather, and so would like the cold weather over the hot weather. And so the staff have ways to adjust either way. Animals could stay inside, or when it gets too hot, they'll set up like sprinklers or ice baths or stuff for the animals to use to kind of get out of the heat. A lot of times animals too, they'll find shade maybe towards the back of their habitat and find their natural ways to cool down.
Wow. I mean, I think the penguin thing's just throwing probably everybody right now.
Yeah, I mean everything that you read on the internet isn't true.
Yeah, right. Or
Yeah,
that you read in
like
books or see on TV growing up. Yeah.
Yeah.
right, because I'm sure everybody as a kid when they were first introduced to penguins, they were talking about like the Antarctic type penguins that are, at home in the ice and in the frigid water and watching old cartoons like Chilly Willy.
Chilly Willy.
If you remember that one, Brad,
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
know. But
Aging ourselves here, Mike.
I know, but there's a lot of people who still watch those when even after those were over with. I know they were like made in probably the 50s or something or the 40s. But anyway, but yeah, I mean it's interesting how different animals cope with different situations, and I kind of figured the giraffe, would be more acclimated to warm weather. But the penguins kind of threw me a little bit, for sure.
Yep. And it throws a lot of people because we'll get people that come, in the wintertime and they're like, where are the penguins? And we're like, they're inside. And they're like, what? We're like, it's actually too cold. And yeah, so that's a big question that we get a lot of times.
All right. Well, I noticed you do have wolves at the zoo,
Correct.
correct?
Yep.
Are they more acclimated to the cold weather? I mean, I know a lot of times I've gone there and I haven't actually seen them out there, so I don't know if they're hiding in caves or what they're up to.
Yeah, so they're Mexican gray wolves, so they actually come from more of a warmer climate, but being wolves in the fur, they don't mind the cold weather, and a lot of them actually will enjoy the snow. So that habitat's one of my favorites. It's probably one of the most naturalistic habitats that we have. So they are able to utilize a lot of the places. So they are also our most hands-off animal. So the keepers are the most hands-off with them. They are part of a breeding program, which a lot of our animals are. But their breeding program, because of how endangered they are, wants to keep them as least habituated to humans as possible. So for that reason, a lot of times they will stay pretty far up in their habitat when guests are at the zoo. They're not as used to having people around, so they kind of use their own way to kind of be separate or be away. We also have a new pack. So over the last couple of years, we did have an older pack that unfortunately, as they aged and had issues, had passed away. But we have a younger pack now that's one female and three males. And so I think they came in probably about a year ago. So it took them a little time to get habituated in the new, their new environment, but they are a lot more active now than our other pack is. So if you come more recently, they're a little bit more visible and active when you come to the zoo.
See, Brad, I brought up a sore subject. See, the old pack got old, and some had to pass away. So now I feel terrible.
I mean,
Sorry,
no,
Cher.
it happens. It's no. Unfortunately, we'd love animals to live forever, but they don't. So.
So do you guys have a contingency plan now at the zoo? I mean, well, I guess there's been a lot of severe weather, whether it's been flooding or the cold and snowstorms, even like I guess tropical systems. I mean, what happens when there is some kind of a large scale weather event? Like we're not just talking about a bad thunderstorm or something, but like, do you guys have plans for the animals? I guess you must.
Yeah. So we are accredited by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. So they also have a whole committee about making those plans. So it is a big part of our accreditation that we have to have all those plans in place. So the one that obviously impacts us the most is the snow. Even though we have, the water around us, luckily we're high enough up that flooding doesn't tend to be an issue for the animals. It's more for the staff, because all of our exits you have to go through water. So it's more so of making sure that the staff can come and go from the zoo. But for snow, or if it's like a tropical storm or a hurricane, we have the staff that are watching that very closely for, watching the forecast for probably at least a week leading up to it. They start to put generators out, prep all the habitats, make sure they're all secure, and kind of do all that. And then we do have staff that stay overnight. For the snowstorms, they're out there shoveling in the middle of the night, making sure that they can have access to everything, trying to keep all the pathways clear.
So you have like quarters for the staff to stay?
Yeah, and a lot of times they'll sleep in the office, so we have a big room that we use for programming that has a fireplace, so they'll kind of set that up and, get down on some cots and kind of hang out in there. Same thing for in the summertime, a tropical storm, in case, a tree would get knocked down or we lose power. The staff have to go around and turn on all the generators or, remove tree limbs and check on everybody, make sure no one escaped or, that their habitats weren't impacted by any of the bad weather.
Yeah, I didn't think of that idea there. If you get severe weather coming through and trees get knocked down, well, what if one falls on a fence, and then all of a sudden, you have
Hey
zebras
guys, I found a way
running
out.
around. Yeah, that's interesting. That's something that we like to do here at WeatherWorks with our storm alert forecast. Our clients aren't zoos. However, that's what we're doing for our road departments and things like that, where we're giving those forecasts for severe weather and for snow, so they can plan their activities around everything. So it's interesting to see that the zoo kind of does the same sort of thing, where they're constantly monitoring the weathers to keep everything safe with the animals.
Yep, and we do it for guests too. Like we have a weather alert system in our main office that tracks how close lightning strikes are. Obviously, we're an outdoor facility, so we do have even we call it like a code weather. So we have drills that we run. There's a code. So if there's a lightning strike close enough to the zoo, we call code weather. The staff have animals that need to go in. The giraffe being one of them. He's kind of a tall thing that you don't really want to be out in bad weather. So the keepers will go around and shift the animals in, and the rest of the staff, make sure that the guests are getting under cover or somewhere safe. So it's whether it's a storm that's coming in a couple days or the day of, it is definitely something that we have to monitor very closely.
So I thought about the giraffe for a second. Can the giraffe get blown over by the by the wind because he's so tall, or is it kind of like
he's not so much getting blown over, but being a lightning rod?
Oh,
yeah.
Come on, Mike.
God, I need to get off this podcast. I didn't think of the lightning rod for that. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
it's funny when you do go to the draft area because you can see like a really skinny, tall building there that he goes in, which is kind of neat. But I was just curious. I was thinking of a giraffe. I was thinking of him falling over, and I don't know why. But the giraffes like to lay down if they're gonna sleep or something like that, or what do they do?
So usually they don't. They're usually stand for most of their lives. We do have, all giraffes are different. So we have had giraffe that like to lay down. And so I know initially if people see them laying down, it's a little odd. You don't expect to see a giraffe laying down. But they will do it. It's just not necessarily their average or normal choice or behavior. Probably because more so out in the wild, if they lay down, they're a lot more vulnerable to predators, and it's not something that they can necessarily get up real quick and go if they need to. But obviously, giraffe in zoos don't need to worry about that. So they're able to be a little bit more comfortable to lay down when they want to.
So let's circle back around to the weather topic. Um, like I said in the intro, sometimes people talk about their pets. They act strangely beforehand, before a storm or something like that. Obviously, we know that your penguins aren't going to be hanging out in the snowstorm. Uh, but what are there? Do you see that at the zoo? Do you see some animals that can sense like a thunderstorm is coming, or a big nor'easter or some big weather event? Do they act differently?
Yeah, the draft being one of them. You can definitely, if there's like a big storm or weather event, you could probably, see that they get a little bit more anxious. Some of them do. The draft are also just naturally anxious animals. But the same way as we think with humans, you can see in some of the geriatric animals that might have some arthritis. You can tell that the arthritis starts acting up with the pressure. So there's definitely ways that you can pick up on some weather coming with the animal's behavior.
You'd think the giraffe is his neck out. He probably could see the weather coming probably better than anyone else.
The first thing, he actually sends off the alarm when
Oh,
there's
that's my zoo joke. Yeah,
Yeah, see, we need a trained giraffe here at WeatherWorks, Brad,
yeah.
that
Let's go to the
keeps an eye
store.
out, hits the panic button when he sees the first signs of a storm, and we're all set.
Yeah, no, it's a great system.
Yeah. Yeah, in my weird thoughts, yes, it's a great system, but maybe not in reality. Uh,
Let's go back to that when we were talking about the geriatric animals. I mean, in the arthritis. I mean, we actually have one of our coworkers and one of our fellow meteorologists. She has an old dog, and she always talks about there's more pain prior to the storms with her dog and the changing barometric pressure, I guess. And I guess the same thing would happen with that. Is there one animal that's more prone to this than others that you noticed?
I wouldn't say species wise. It was again, will just probably be any of our animals that we know have like a history of arthritis. Like we had mentioned our wolves in the past that were older that had some arthritis. You could definitely tell that it might be a little bit harder for them to get around, and like people always say, like I can feel it in my knees, and so I'm sure they could feel it as well.
That's just amazing how the animals are so much alike when it comes to humans, and bad knees or arthritis, and a lot of different. I guess the heat would be just the same way. I mean, what about really really hot weather? I mean, are they easier to? I mean, worry about, I guess, dehydration and things like that because I guess they're a lot less active too when it's hot during the summertime.
Yeah, for sure. We actually usually tell guests that the best time to come to the zoo is probably almost like a day like today, where it's mild, the sun's not beating down, because across the board, that's probably the best time. The animals are going to be most active. Also, usually like first thing in the morning when the zoo just opens, they'll probably be most active. But naturally, people come to the zoo in the summer more so when it's hot. So we do get some complaints where animals aren't visible or they're all laying down. And our answer to that is usually like the animals, just like us, don't want to be running, a marathon and in the heat, and they all naturally, will go and find shade and lay down to escape it just like we would.
That's funny. I understand, people wanting to see the animals and upset that they don't see them or whatever. But really, I mean, what can you really do if the animal doesn't want to come out?
Hey, you tiger, get out here!
Yeah,
Show yourself to my kid.
It is, and I gotta say, it seems like every time I've taken my kids to the zoo, for some reason, I picked the hottest day, and it's when the animals are less active, obviously, and I always end up just getting to the gift shop at the end, and I'm just like, oh, a little bit of air conditioning, yay, but but man, it always seems like I pick a bad day, except when you have the lights during the holiday season.
Yeah, and then I usually for the lights end up picking like the coldest day.
Perfect. Perfect. Um, yeah, but I mean, I guess we also want to talk a little bit about um, maybe it doesn't affect the zoo quite so much, but maybe like hibernation tendencies. I mean, maybe some of your animals do hibernate at the zoo there. Um, uh, but is there different tendencies to if a winter is more severe or anything like that? Do they hibernate longer, or how does that interact with the seasonal change?
Yeah, so we do see that to a point with a lot of our animals. So with them being under human care for their whole lives, all the animals that we have are all, born in zoos. They do lose a little bit of that natural like habitat or habit to, you know, hibernate with the seasons. So a lot of animals will do that in the wild because food is scarce. So it's their natural way to survive like a harsh winter. So again, with regular food and areas for warmth, they just don't really necessarily need to do that. But it's not removed from them completely. So we'll definitely see some maybe like appetites slow down with some of our animals. We will do like seasonal changes to their diet that would mimic what their diet would look like in the wild seasonally. So if an animal needs to like bulk up for the winter, you can definitely see their appetite change leading up to the winter. So we'll monitor and change the diet accordingly. And vice versa. A lot of our reptiles or they slow down in the winter time. So their appetite will decrease as well. So it's while they might not actually go hide away for the winter, there's definitely still signs of that natural behavior to adjust seasonally.
So you talked a little bit about your reptiles. I know there's a reptile building. So even though they're in that controlled habitat, they still have some sort of adjustment to the season.
Yeah, and our animals that we use for programming are also in a controlled room, and we have a lot of reptiles. We also used to have a groundhog in that room, and even though they're not necessarily, that room stays the same temperature year round. But we could see behavior changes in all of them. Their diet will change. The groundhog, her behavior would change. We actually, a lot of times we wouldn't use her on programming for the whole winter because she was used to sleeping and doesn't want to be disturbed. And she would let us know that she doesn't want to be disturbed. So yeah, even though they're in a climate controlled, we can't completely, get rid of that natural instinct.
All right, so share. How does the extended periods of rain, or if there's like a flooding event, how does that impact the animals? Those that kind of burrow or maybe even live underground, do they relocate? Do they rebuild? I mean, you guys help them rebuild. I mean, what happens in that situation?
So we kind of let them naturally do their thing. The only things that we have that burrow, we had some prairie dogs. And so they kind of have their own burrow system that they would in the wild. And so they have different chambers and paths that they can go into. Um, that they can naturally kind of escape what they need to.
So that's I mean, are there any other animals that I guess would be? I mean, you guys probably bring them in and stuff anyway when there's going to be some flooding. But is there any more susceptible animals than others?
I don't really think so. I think luckily the zoo as a whole is pretty high up, so we don't usually have to worry about flooding too much.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's always good.
Well, we did have a question here about birds flying south, but I guess that wouldn't really happen in the enclosure there at the zoo. I know it's like a bird area where they're inside. But I guess, do you still, I don't know, do they still try to do that even though they're in the cages?
Well, how true is that though? Again, let's the penguin thing kind of messed me up too. Maybe birds don't fly south.
Maybe they don't.
So they do, but a lot of times they'll fly south for warmer weather if they can't deal with the cold, or for like different food sources. So a lot of times too, if they have that controlled in their environment, then they wouldn't have the need to go south.
Okay, so there we go. So we don't have a bunch of birds just like flying into the fence, trying to get out of their enclosure. Oh man. So a good thing we don't have that going on, because that would definitely not be a good sight for the kids out there.
All right, so here's a question now, and this is something that's of course becoming more front and center in weather and the outlooks and weather in the future now. Concerns about climate change. I mean, are there potential impacts that may have on the animals there? I mean, is there heat stress, delayed frost and freeze season? Anything like that you've noticed since your time there, or maybe something that's the zoo may be preparing for?
I won't say we're necessarily preparing for it, but it's definitely something that you can notice, I think. Same thing with, us and the climate changing. I feel like this month is a perfect example of about that a little bit, and so I think it just kind of goes along with, some of the animals might have to be inside longer than they're used to, or, it's probably going to make it a little bit more difficult for the keepers that have maybe a longer, hotter summer that they have to work through to, keep the animals cool. We have some longer, hotter stretches that, require a lot more work from the keepers to make sure that all the animals are, not getting overheated. So I think those are some of like the minor, I guess you can call them minor changes or fluctuations we would see. And then a big part of what my department does is trying to educate the community about that and make that connection and create that empathy and knowledge about how that impacts the animals, more so in the wild, but how it impacts pretty much everybody. And like ways that we can do that. And so we do use those animals as ways to help make that connection, because a lot of the animals, especially the ones that live in those warmer climates, their habitats are being impacted by the weather. And we don't have ocean animals really, but the penguins too, like they actually are really suffering from overheating down in South Africa because of the changes in climate. So I think we have that good opportunity to kind of talk to people about that and hopefully make some connections and impacts with people. But yeah, I think across the board it's going to be similar changes that you'll see, that you see with just humans and us in our everyday lives.
Well, we have added a new month to the calendar. It's now 13 months in the year, and it's called January-April. So, and really, I guess December you can add another one. It seems like we're getting later and later this any kind of winter. We'll get a quick shot of winter in late October, time for Halloween. Then before you know it, it's warm again until January. So I don't know, these patterns are messed up, and something I've noticed just in my lifetime being in weather now for 20 plus years. It's just there is definitely something going on that's not the same as it was when I first started weather. So that's for sure.
Oh, for sure. And this month and this cold weather is impacting the education department. We usually start doing programming outside. The schools start to pick up, and we're actually started looking ahead at next week, and it looks like it's back in the 50s all week. A lot of our animals that we use for programming, it has to be a minimum of 65 outside. So we're trying to scramble and figure out where we move these schools and, how we do programming that requires animals when it's too cold outside. And it's not something that we usually have to do with this time of year.
Yeah, Brad, I think the month you're looking for was on The Simpsons. What they call it, Smarch?
Oh
Lousy Smarch weather.
Papa. Yeah, lousy smarch weather. Yeah, it's true. Smarch, January, April, or whatever you want to call it. It's like all combined into late winter, early spring into one season.
I would have to agree with you, Brad, especially here in the Northeast. I feel like we're getting more snow events later than I ever really remember. Yeah, I mean, maybe there was that one or two when I was smaller or a kid, but, maybe it's me just being more observant of the weather because that's what I do. But I gotta say, I mean, I even liked weather when I was a kid, and I don't remember it snowing in any fashion,
Well, it just
in April.
lingers, and it just, yeah.
So it's quite interesting what changes.
Does that throw the animals for a loop, though? I guess, Cher. I mean, do you see any difference, like when you do have like this year? Spring just doesn't want to get going and linger, or the winter wants to linger forever. And I guess, like you said, you can't do the outdoor stuff. It's just, I mean, do you see other animals that are impacted by this?
The animals are probably, especially the ones that are in for the winter, are just as antsy for the warm weather as we are. And, you get those teasing days where, they get to come out and are happy and excited and get that vitamin D. And then they have to go back in for, like 2 weeks. And so, yeah, I think it parallels us for a lot of that, where it's, you just want to be out. You feel kind of, needing that seasonal depression to go away and wanting to be outside, and you get teased by it for a little bit.
So I guess that's the theme here. Yeah, think about how you feel. Just because we're humans doesn't mean the animals and us are affected differently. If we're hot, a lot of times the animal is hot and not happy either. Or if they're cold too. So unless you're a acclimated animal like a polar bear or something, but obviously you don't have polar bears at the Lehigh Valley Zoo.
Yeah, no,
we'll pass on it.
We're a little small for
we'll
that
pass
one.
on those guys. But I guess we're talking about a lot of weather changes out there. But what about change in general? Like if an animal passes away in an enclosure that they're used to, or do the animals react to that? Do they, or an introduction to a new animal, the same wolf or whatever, the gray wolf? How do they? I guess how do they deal with that change? Do they freak out when a new wolf arrives, or how does it work?
Yeah, so they absolutely are impacted by that, and a big part of the process, on both sides of that. If an animal passes away that is in with multiple animals of that species, it's something that the keepers have to monitor closely and monitor the behavior and how the other animals are adapting to that loss. And what type of changes they can make to help that animal through that. And then if we bring in a new animal, there's a long process of introductions. So it's, we don't just put them together a lot of times. A lot of times it's getting them close where they can smell each other, see each other, but still have a barrier, monitoring that, see how well they do. And then there's kind of like steps where maybe they're only together for a couple hours a day while keepers can monitor them, and then they get separated at night until everyone's kind of feeling comfortable that they're getting along. But to a point, and we do let them do their thing as long as it's not getting out of control, because some of that's also a natural way for animals to introduce each other to a new animal. So it's a big part of knowing the natural history and the natural behavior of that animal. So you know kind of what to let them do, and also kind of when you need to step in.
Something we've started to watch, and really, I guess it's been going on for a couple of years now. I don't know if you're aware of it, but the Secrets of the Zoo, and it's basically a day to day business of the Tampa Bay Zoo and behind the scenes, basically. And I'll tell you, we're watching it. It's just it's very interesting what goes on with each animal and the different lifestyles that they all have. I mean, is there any comparison to that? I don't know if you watched the show or not.
Oh yeah, I watch it. I think that's one of the things about people in this field is you don't necessarily get sick of it. I enjoy watching it and seeing how other zoos function. Like on vacation, I always have to visit whatever zoo or aquariums in the area.
So you're like a
But
weather
yeah,
dork
it's
like us, but you on
yeah.
the animals.
Yeah, my husband doesn't always understand that. He's like, "You do this every
Yeah,
day.
yeah.
Why is this what you want to do on
Stop
vacation?" I'm
talking
like,
about the weather. Enough.
I still enjoy it. Yeah, so it definitely mirrors. I feel like a lot of facilities are very similar, especially ones that are all fall under the accreditation, because they're the ones that set a lot of, pretty much all the standards across the board. So all of the zoos that are accredited need to follow those standards. Obviously, scale wise, like the Bronx Zoo in Tampa Bay or Tampa Zoo is a lot larger than Lehigh Valley Zoo is. So, the scale is different, and, the size of some of the animals are different. But overall, it's, that behind the scenes stuff is happening
Yeah.
everywhere.
Mike, have you ever seen that show yet, or any
I
interest?
have not. No.
Yeah, it's on. I think Disney carries it, right? Is it on the streams on Disney? Yeah, that's where we watch it. It's really National Geographic, but I think it's the third season, and boy, I'll tell you, it is so interesting to watch how things go with each animal, and it's just each animal and is so different in how they react to different things and what they're doing with each of them every single day. It's so cool.
Yeah, it's really neat. That's one of the things that we talk about when people want to get into this field. And I think way back when you think of like a zookeeper and all they're doing is feeding the animal and picking up poop.
Yeah, it's not.
Um, and like, oh, people, we still probably get comments like, you need to go to college, otherwise you're going to be scooping poop at a zoo. But we require like college degrees, and it's a lot more, of the psychology and knowing natural behavior of animals. And it takes a lot of work and commitment for sure to be able to do all that background
I'm
stuff.
saying it runs along the lines of weather. I mean, it's not a 9 to 5 job. I'm sure your hours change. We're at the mercy of the weather. If it's nice, sure, we can get away with the 9 to 5, where you get your forecast shift out of the way and you're done by noon. But in the wintertime, especially, our schedules change a lot, and sometimes they turn into 12-hour shifts. And just like animals, they're alive all day. They got to get taken care of at certain other times of the days as well.
Yep, absolutely. Especially in, the keepers, I'm sure, are very excited that the winter hopefully is coming to an end because, yeah, not only are they taking care of the animals, there's snow removal, and they're the ones that are staying overnight. So you could, you're there for potentially 48 hours working and, up every couple hours checking on animals. And holidays too. You don't get holidays off. I'm sure that probably mirrors you guys as
Yeah, the
well.
weather doesn't stop just because it's Christmas. No, we're not going to snow today. Don't worry. Nobody cares.
Yeah, exactly. And so we say that animals still need to eat, and for sure.
So I guess one of our last questions is there any real notable weather events that happened during your time at the zoo that you just found that was just an extreme event that was really difficult to deal with?
Um, Luckily, I haven't had a massive one. Besides just whatever big snowstorms that we get. I was not there yet for Hurricane Sandy, and I know that was impacted the zoo pretty big. I know. I think they were didn't have water for I think like a lot of people didn't have water for a couple days, and trying to figure out how to do that. How to, the animals still need fresh water. You need water to flush the toilets and all that stuff and clean the enclosures. So I know that was a big struggle. And a lot of times, if we think the power is going to go out, we will fill like prepare, like we'll fill whatever buckets we can find with water ahead of time. But obviously Hurricane Sandy was more than you could prepare for naturally with how long of an impact that was.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the recent events I could just think of is the recent blizzard we had. Brad, when was that? Back in 2019, was it? Or 2020?
2018 or 19, yeah, the big
Yeah, where
one,
we had
yeah.
like 3 days of snow and there was like 3 feet. So,
Yeah, and that's those keepers are a lot of times it's the same keepers. You get to work, even if you weren't scheduled that day, but the snow is coming. A lot of them will come, get there 7 o'clock at night for their shift the next day, stay over, and if you've ever been near the game preserve, we are usually the last ones plowed out. So then those keepers are stuck there because no one can get there and no one can leave. So they end up working, potentially 3 days in a row because they can't get any relief
yeah, so it's
from the staff yet.
mainly a removal issue and maybe not so much of the animal issue when it comes to big snows like that.
Yeah, a removal issue and a power issue. Being out where all the electricity runs through the preserve, so trees on power lines is a big issue. So being there, for snow removal, making sure that the snow isn't too heavy on any of the enclosures and making sure that that stays off of it is a big part, as well as making sure all the generators are up and running if need be.
I just had one question too. On your way out, isn't there bison or something that are in the fields? Um, and
Yeah, yep, we've got
okay,
bison and elk.
I guess they're just cool on their own out there. They don't they don't need a place to kind of shelter in or anything like that, or how does that work?
Yeah, and they're kind of a unique situation. So they're actually owned by the county. They're not owned by the zoo, but our keepers take care of them. So, but yeah, they have pretty large like natural habitats out on the preserve. So they're and both of those animals are pretty well adjusted to or built for colder climates and the snow. The bison probably love the snow. Um, but the keepers do that is part of their rounds during bad weather is making sure that none of those the fences are compromised at all. So that is still part of a lot of that bad weather prep.
Yeah, I was thinking of the goats at the zoo, and I know the stereotype is that goats eat just about anything. Yeah, this is kind of like an off the wall type question because I'm just curious, and now that I have somebody who knows about this, what's like the craziest thing you saw one of these goats eat?
Um, oh, that's a hard question because they do eat everything. So I think we try as best as we can to stick them to their diet, but they'll eat pamphlets, brochures that people have, or kids are holding stuff over or their shirt. They will pretty much try to eat everything. During our winter lights, same thing. There's like s'mores and stuff down there, so I'm sure they get hold of some of that stuff or a hot dog or pretty much whatever they can get their hands on. We do, have staff kind of out through the zoo as much as we can to monitor and make sure that none of the animals are eating stuff they're not supposed to. But the goats are probably one of the trickier ones because we do offer goat feeding. We just have to make sure that they're getting fed the correct things.
So why is it that the goats just want to eat anything? Is there a reason?
I actually don't know the answer to that question.
I'm just curious. Like, why do they see a pamphlet and they just think to themselves, well, you know what? That might be tasty. Let's go for it.
I, yeah, I really don't have an answer for that.
It's
That's
like you,
a
Mike. You
good
don't know when your
thing.
next meal's coming, so
Oh,
you got to eat as much as you can.
um, yeah, you might see me picking up some grass outside and, you know, throwing a little dressing on it. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I brought that question up because I think one of the times I was there during the pandemic, and I know we're still dealing with it in some respects. But I believe it was either a goat or something like that that might have ate somebody's mask.
That was our ostrich, actually. One of the ostrich did eat a mask. So I know we had to, like, block it off. We
Oh
had to
my
call the
goodness.
vet. Um, Ostriches aren't necessarily the easiest animals to get your hands on, or the safest. But yeah, they had to pretty much go out and, half
Oh wow.
sedate and
Yeah,
be
get
able
rid
to
of that.
go down
Yeah.
and check, and yeah, they eventually pulled a mask out. I think, ostriches are probably very similar to goats in that manner, where they're just curious and will potentially eat anything that they can get their
Yeah, and
mouths
it's
on at that
surprising
point.
when you do see an ostrich how big an ostrich actually is.
Yeah, they're pretty intense. I think we usually say they're up there on one of our most dangerous animals, at the zoo. They can run pretty fast, and their kicks are no
I
joke.
bet. I mean, I know when I have seen them there, I was kind of intimidated by it. I was not to lie. I was like, man, like, I don't know about this guy. He looks like he's up to no good. So, but I mean, along those lines, I mean, has there been any other challenges with the pandemic at the zoo?
Yeah, actually, I think too, trying to get people to understand we do still have, mask mandates in place for a lot of our staff, our animal staff. So the pandemic is a zoonotic disease, so it's something that can get, transmitted from human to animal, and easier, I think, than a lot of people thought initially. And I know a lot of zoos have unfortunately lost animals, that have, you know, caught that. And so, as research has been coming out, what animals are more susceptible or easier to catch it, there's a lot of, protective gear, including masks, that staff have to still wear, to this day. So I know for a little bit, trying to, get the guests to understand, while, mask mandates might be dropped, we still have them in place for some close quarters, or, close encounters with animals, because they're still susceptible. And we luckily were actually able to vaccinate a good handful of them, but there's also not a whole lot of research about how effective the vaccine is yet. So we're still having to, do a lot of that work to continue to protect them.
Wow. So they have animal vaccines for COVID.
Yeah, and because I mean, people like said, like, COVID, different strains of COVID have been around for a while, and usually mostly in animals. So, I think they probably to a point had some basis there of, a vaccine. So just kind of like our vaccine, it probably didn't take too long to develop, but there wasn't so much research about the effectiveness. So again, another thing that kind of mirrors what we've gone through.
Wow. So, man, this is a really interesting conversation. Brad, do you have any more off the wall questions to ask Animal Wise? Are you sure? I know that you always seem to like talking about a skink.
Oh, you're right. You know what? Well, again, when I went to the Philadelphia Zoo a couple of years ago, the first time I went down there, and I was the first time I've seen a skink, and I was just amazed by this little reptile animal, and I came back to the office and I was like, I said, "Hey, Mike, do you know what a skink is?" And he's like, "Come on, you can't talk about that stuff." I was like, "No, it's an." So for some reason, I got on thinking about skink. Do you have any skinks at Lehigh Valley Zoo?
Yeah, we actually have three different species of them. The most common, I think people know, over the blue tongue skink. So we do have one of those, as an education animal. We also have a shingleback skink as an education animal. They kind of just look like giant pine cones. And we actually named ours, Dwayne the Rock Johnson, because it looks like kind of a rock, and that's their, like, way that they, camouflage. So that's a fun thing that we can do, is when we choose names for them. And then we have some other, they're like prehensile tail skinks. So spend a lot of time in the trees. They have a prehensile tail like monkeys do that acts as like a fifth limb for them. Yeah, they're
Yeah,
pretty cool.
I just gotta say they look like they're interesting. So I had to start looking them up, and I got all affiliated with skinks. And,
So hopefully the Rock is not listening to this program. And you have something in common with a skink, Rock. So, but
He has a skink
yes,
named
he
after
would be
him.
proud,
So.
I'm sure. We should drop into his IM or something, or his DMs, and say, "Hey, do you know there's a skink named after you at the Lehigh Valley Zoo?" He'd probably be like,
And he's locally, I think he's from like Bethlehem or
"Right,
Freedom. He went to
right,
Freedom High School, I think. So just needs to come home and come visit the
yes,
zoo.
exactly. That's your in. You see, we could talk to him about this.
We could
Be
do
like, you
that,
know about
yeah.
the Lehigh Valley Zoo, of course. You're from the area. But anyway, is there anything that you guys are super excited about at the zoo that maybe you're getting a new animal or anything like that? Anything on the horizon here that is really exciting?
Yeah, we're actually, I think May 1st, about to break ground on a new habitat. We've always had some mongoose lemurs at the zoo. They're harder to see where they are now, and we eventually would like to breed. So we're about to break ground on a fairly large new habitat that will house the lemurs that we have, hopefully give us some space to one day have some baby lemurs. There'll be some tortoises in there. And they're also another animal that in the wintertime guests didn't get to see because they would go indoors. But with this new habitat, there will be an indoor area for them to be that's still viewable to guests throughout the colder months. So that's our big capital fundraiser that's going on right now. It's pretty much a huge focus of what is going on in the zoo currently.
Cool. So I guess before we leave here, why don't you just give a quick plug about the Lehigh Valley Zoo, where people can find you, and all that good stuff.
Great. Yeah, so we are located in Schnecksville. It's just a little bit north of Allentown on 309. We're in the middle of a beautiful game preserve, so a lot of times we tell guests you can come visit the
the
zoo, do a
Trexler
lap
Town.
around the zoo. Yep, the Trexler Game Preserve, and then go out and hike and enjoy some of those trails. If the weather will start getting warmer, I think spring is a great time also to come to the zoo. Again, not too hot, so animals should be a little bit more active. And we have a lot of exciting things coming on, like the new exhibit coming. And I think we've got some great plans over the next couple years, new programming. There's a lot of exciting things to do. So, and it's a great day trip. It's not, you could probably enjoy the zoo in 2 or 3 hours. So it's not something you have to commit a full day to.
Well, I think that about does it for our podcast. So, Cher, thanks a lot for being on this.
Yeah, thank you so much.
That is it for the Weather Lounge podcast for this week. Keep in mind, we'll have a new podcast every 2 weeks, so please be sure to check those out. And also, you can visit WeatherWorks at weatherworksinc.com and all our social media channels by just searching WeatherWorks. And as always, please, please, please give a nice like to our podcast and a review of our podcast too. That really helps push our show forward. So that's it for this week, and thanks for listening to us on Weather Lounge.